What's up, everybody? This is Anti-Hero with Player One Gaming, and today I'm going to be showing you the best first level spells in Baldur's Gate 3. Now, I managed painfully to be able to get this into a top 10, but believe me, it was not easy. There are so many good first level spells in the game, so at the end we will have a few honorable mentions, and I'm sure there's going to be some that I leave out that some people want on this list. So now's the time just to remind everyone this is very much a subjective thing. These are some of my favorite spells, the ones that I think are the best. If I left one out, feel free to let me know in the comments below. So with that, let's jump into it. The first spell on our list is Thunderwave. Now, Thunderwave is an AoE spell. It is a save attack spell that targets Constitution, and it does relatively average damage for a first level AoE spell. The real reason Thunderwave made this list is because when targets fail their save, they're blown backwards. That is why Thunderwave is on this list. It's an AoE spell that can blow multiple targets off of a ledge. This is a common theme with a lot of the best spells in the game. Many of them make the list because they are able to do multiple things. In this case, Thunderwave does average damage to multiple targets while also pushing them back. If I'm being honest, originally I was not going to put Thunderwave on this list. That wasn't until I realized that when my wizard didn't have Thunderwave prepared, I felt it. Thunderwave was the one thing that allowed my low to mid-level wizard to push enemies back. When they didn't have Thunderwave prepared, I realized how much I missed it. In fact, in that particular instance, I went back and respec'd Gale just to get Thunderwave in my spellbook ASAP. Pushing enemies off of high ledges in this game is just too powerful not to have Thunderwave in your spellbook. Alright, next up we've got another damage dealing spell, and that is Guiding Bolt. Now, Guiding Bolt can actually only be acquired by the cleric. And if you have a cleric in your party, Guiding Bolt is a must-have spell. To begin with, it does some serious damage for a first level spell, at 4d6 worth of radiant damage. And that's the other thing. Radiant damage is not easy to come by in this game. It's also probably the least resisted damage type, meaning there are very few enemies in this game, if any, that have resistance to radiant damage. In fact, many, specifically the undead that you will run into quite a bit in Baldur's Gate 3, are vulnerable to radiant damage. So that's huge. And not just that, but there are many enemies in this game, some of the higher level undead, like shadows, for instance. Shadows are resistant to almost all types of damage, but vulnerable to radiant damage, meaning just about every attack you throw at them is going to be halved, except for the radiant damage, which will be doubled. That will be your go-to method of defeating these types of enemies. So not only is it super useful like that, but on top of that, Guiding Bolt gives you a little something extra. It grants advantage on the next attack roll against this target. So your cleric can hit your opponent with a Guiding Bolt, setting the next attacker up with advantage, which can be pretty awesome if you have a rogue in your party that needs to do sneak attack, or someone with great weapon master or sharpshooter. Having advantage on a target can go a long way. Next up we have Faerie Fire. Faerie Fire can be acquired by the Bard, the Druid, the Archfey Warlock, and the Light Domain Cleric, as well as the Drow and the Drow Half-Elf race. Faerie Fire is an AoE spell that shines magical light on your targets, preventing them from becoming invisible and giving you advantage on your attack rolls against everyone that's been hit by it. It does prompt a dexterity save in order to be successful, but the good news is that if your opponent fails this save, that's it. As long as you can maintain concentration on the spell, then they're going to be doused in the Faerie Fire for 10 turns. Unlike some other spells that require them to repeat the save in the beginning of every one of the rounds, which means that they can shake off the effect. There's no shaking off the Faerie Fire once it's on them. Next up we have Dissonant Whispers, which is available to the Bard class and the Great Old One Warlock. This is another fun one for the Bard that has you whispering some spooky stuff to a creature and scaring the hell out of it. You impose the Frighten condition, which can be a very powerful tactic in this game and really completely take your opponent out of the fight for a couple of turns. On top of that, it does 3d6 psychic damage. Psychic damage is rarely resisted in this game. But again, we have a spell that does multiple things, so once we put those two things together, the 3d6 worth of psychic damage and the ability to frighten your opponent, when we can do both of these things in one, it makes Dissonant Whispers a really solid spell and a must pick for the Bard in my opinion. Okay, so I know this is a top 10 list, but some of these spells had to tie. They had to share a spot. And really, these are just situations where the spells are so similar that it was very difficult to choose between them. For our first tie, we have Sleep and Tasha's Hideous Laughter. These are both very powerful first level spells, very similar, but depending on the situation will depend on which one you want to pull out. First, we'll go over Sleep. You can get Sleep with the Wizard, the Sorcerer, the Bard, the Eldritch Knight Fighter, and the Archfey Warlock. And it does just what you might think it does. It puts creatures to sleep. When you cast this spell at first level, you select targets up to a combined of 24 hit points, and that's it. There's no save, nothing. You just pick your enemy. As long as they have 24 hit points or less, they go to sleep. So the big advantage that Sleep has is that when you target a creature that's been affected by the spell with a melee attack, you auto-crit. This is insanely good. And the fact that Tasha's doesn't have this, that almost makes me give the upper hand to Sleep. However, the big drawback with Sleep is that it only affects 24 hit points. If you upcast it, it will target 8 more per level, but still the big drawback with Sleep is that it doesn't scale well with the higher levels of play. That's when Tasha's Hideous Laughter comes in. While it doesn't auto-crit, you still get advantage, and you're not limited by hit points when targeting creatures. Now, Tasha's is a fun spell. You inflict a character with fits of laughter, leaving it prone without the ability to get up for 10 turns. I mean, that's just fun. When I play a bard, they always have this spell, just because it's so like a bard to be like, why don't you just shut up and crack up for a little while? It's like, I might not blast you away, but you know what? I'm just going to make you laugh your ass off so much that you can't do anything else. So this is a concentration spell. It can last up to 10 turns. And while similar to Sleep, it does have some distinct differences. First of all, it is a single target spell, so it doesn't go by hit points. You can only attack one target with this at a time. And unlike Sleep, it does prompt a save from your opponent. So a target must fail a wisdom save. And when they do, they essentially become incapacitated. Now at the beginning of every one of their turns thereafter, they can repeat that save once again. So this is best used on targets that have low wisdom. If your opponent has HP, which is in the range that you can target them with Sleep, I would say go with Sleep. However, when you're facing an opponent with a ton of hit points and Sleep may not be a possibility, I 100% recommend going with Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Okay, next up we have the other tie on this list. 2 spells that are almost identical, and that is Hex and Hunter's Mark. Hunter's Mark can be gained by the Ranger and the Oath of Vengeance Paladin, and Hex is available to the Warlock class. Both of these spells essentially allow you to mark your target using a bonus action to deal an additional 1d6 of damage on them every time you hit them. As long as you maintain your concentration on the spell, it will last until a long rest. Beyond that, it will even allow you to reapply the spell to a new target without burning another spell slot. These 2 spells level up with your character particularly well, but as your character levels up, especially martial classes get things like extra attack. And that's when this spell really shines, because the more attacks you can do when this spell is applied, the more traction you're going to get out of it. Now, while these spells are almost identical, I will give the advantage slightly to Hex, because it also has the added ability to impose disadvantage on a chosen ability check. Regardless, both spells are great, and if you have one of the classes that could pick it up, I consider it a must-pick spell. Alright, the next spell on this list might surprise you, and that's Create or Destroy Water. Create or Destroy Water can be acquired by the Druid or the Cleric, but there's also a staff that you can get pretty early on in the game called Rain Dancer, which can also give you the ability. Creating water in this game can be a very powerful tactic. Creating water can apply the wet condition to your opponent, and the wet condition imposes vulnerability to cold and lightning damage. On top of that, when you use cold damage, it will create a sheet of ice on the ground that your opponents can slip and fall prone, or lightning damage, which will electrify the puddle and cause the shock condition, which removes their reaction and has a chance to stun your opponent. This mechanic is so powerful. For that sole reason, it's why Create or Destroy Water has made this list. You can have the Druid or the Cleric in your party, pour water on multiple opponents, and then have your Wizard cast something like Lightning Bolt or a Cone of Cold on them, creating a massive amount of AoE damage. It's so powerful, it's so fun, and it's why I highly recommend you have Create or Destroy Water in your game. Alright, next up we have Bless. Bless is a spell that can be acquired by the Cleric and the Paladin. It's a concentration spell that allows you to bless up to 3 characters. Though if you upcast it, for every level you upcast it, you can pick an additional character. So if you cast this using a 2nd level spell slot, you can get your whole party with it. It's a concentration spell that lasts up to 10 turns, and when it's active it gives you a 1d4 bonus to your attack rolls and your saving throws. This is very powerful. It can often mean the difference between a hit or a miss, and if you're using it in combination with other spells that can give you advantage, it creates a situation where your attacks are going to land just about every time. So if you have a Cleric or a Paladin in your group, I 100% recommend picking up Bless, and if there's times that you know that you're going to be getting into a combat encounter, this is one of those spells that I will throw up right before going into combat, so I don't burn an action to use it. So yeah, I try and have my entire party blessed going into every combat encounter that I can, because that 1d4 bonus can really make a world of difference. Alright, next up we have Armour of Agathys, which is available to the Warlock and the Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer for the White Dragon. What it does is it kind of shrouds you in this cold mist that gives you 5 temporary hit points and then also deals 5 cold damage to any creature that hits you with a melee attack. At first look, it doesn't look like much. And honestly, at first level, it isn't much. But when this spell becomes a real powerhouse is when you begin to level up. Because the temporary hit points, as well as the cold damage that you inflict, increases by 5 for each spell level. So at 2nd level, you gain 10 temporary hit points and do 10 cold damage. 3rd level, 15. So if you're using a 5th level spell slot to cast Armour of Agathys, that means you're getting 25 temporary hit points and will deal 25 cold damage to anyone who hits you with a melee attack. That is super powerful. What's more is that this lasts until a long rest. So this is one of those spells that I cast on my Warlock every time after a long rest, which automatically gives them their temporary hit points and deals that cold damage in whatever battle they end up in next. So don't sleep on Armour of Agathys. This is a very powerful spell, and if you have a Warlock, I highly recommend it. Alright, next up we have what I consider one of the best spells in the game, and that's Healing Word. Now Healing Word is available to the Cleric, the Druid, and the Bard. So here's what makes this spell so good. Because a lot of new D&D players come in, they see Healing Word and they see Cure Wounds. And they see that Cure Wounds heals more hit points than Healing Word. So at first sight, you'd want to pick Cure Wounds, right? Well, the downside to Cure Wounds is that you actually have to be in melee range of the person you're trying to heal, which can be surprisingly difficult in a fight. The other difference is that Cure Wounds is a standard action, but Healing Word is a bonus action. This still allows you to be able to use your action to attack or do some other ability, while still being able to heal your companion across the map on the same turn. That's huge. And while 1d4 isn't a lot of healing, when you begin to be able to upcast this spell, in the higher levels of play, if you're using a level 5 or a level 6 spell slot on Healing Word, you're going to be able to do some serious healing. While I really don't recommend having a dedicated healer in this game, if you have a Bard, Cleric, or Druid in your party, I 100% recommend picking up Healing Word. Alright, so that's our top 10 list, but like I said, that was tough, because there are still a lot of good first level spells out there. So real quick, we are just going to touch on some honorable mentions. First up, we have Mage Armor. Mage Armor can be acquired by the Sorcerer, the Wizard, the Arcane Trickster, or the Eldritch Knight Fighter. But really, it's going to be your Sorcerer and your Wizard who takes this spell. And if you're playing one of those two spellcasters, I 100% recommend it, because let's face it, they're squishy, right? Your Wizard or your Sorcerer, they don't wear armor, and they need something to protect themselves. What Mage Armor does is it increases your AC to 13 plus the character's dex modifier. So this will likely boost your AC by a couple of points, which is good, but a real game changer is if you can manage to find a magic item or some other ability that will boost your AC even a couple more points, and then you're really cooking with gas. In my current playthrough, I got Gale's AC at 16. That's pretty damn good for a wizard. So I highly recommend picking up Mage Armor if you got yourself one of those squishy spellcasters that just need an extra little bit of protection. Next up is Fog Cloud. It can be acquired by the Wizard, the Sorcerer, the Ranger, the Druid, the Tempest Domain Cleric, the Arcane Trickster, and the Eldritch Knight. The key to Fog Cloud, most of the time, is to not necessarily cast it on your enemies, but cast it on yourself. If you find yourself in a big open area with nowhere to hide, cast Fog Cloud. you can hide in the cloud. When it's your turn, you come out, you attack, and then you go back in and hide again. This can really be a lifesaver in those situations where you find your whole party bunched up together in a big open area with nowhere to hide. Cast Fog Cloud. Now you got automatic cover. And any enemy that comes in after you is blinded. So this is actually a really solid defensive spell. Okay, next up on our honorable mentions is Chromatic Orb. This is a damage dealing spell that does a decent amount of damage, but really what makes it so good is the fact that you can choose the damage type. Either Thunder, which does 3d8 of damage, or does 2d8 of damage of acid, cold, fire, lightning, or poison. This is a very powerful tactic because you can use it for creatures that have certain vulnerabilities to certain damage types. You can also use it to utilize that mechanic that I mentioned earlier with the Create Water spell. So just having that versatility available to you makes Chromatic Orb a spell that you should certainly look into. Okay, lastly on our honorable mentions list, we have two spells that are kind of tied, very similar, Enhanced Leap and Long Strider. Both of these spells are going to allow you to be able to get around the map much easier, much quicker. Now, both of these spells are a ritual, which means that you do not have to expend a spell slot to use, so that's great. Enhanced Leap lasts 10 turns, and it triples a creature's jumping distance. I recommend this above Long Strider for your ranged attackers, like a ranger who's an archer who really benefits from high ground. Now, Long Strider increases your movement speed by 3 meters or 5 feet, but it does so until a long rest. So this is another one of those spells that you'll just cast right when you wake up from a long rest, and it just lasts the whole day and gives you that increased movement speed, which can make a big difference. Okay, so that wraps up our video on the best first level spells in Baldur's Gate 3. I do hope this video was helpful to you. I've got more videos like this coming out. We're going to be doing one for every spell level, so please like and subscribe so you can be notified when those drop. I do appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.